Good day, everyone, and welcome to today's containerjournal.com webinar. We're very excited that you've joined us. We've got a great topic today. It's all about protecting your data in Kubernetes. Very timely topic given how popular Kubernetes is and how widely it's being used. Very happy to have our webinar today sponsored by Zetaset. My name is Mitch Ashley. I'm CEO of Accelerated Strategies Group. I'll serve as your host and moderator and also one of the panelists, one of the contributors. Few housekeeping items. We are recording the webinar and all participants will receive an email with a link to the recording as well as a link to the slides. So sit back, listen, enjoy, take a few notes if you like. There's going to be some great discussion, a lot of conversation, not as much slides. So we'll lighten the load on the slides and keep the content in the dialogue. Now, speaking of dialogue, all of our panelists, all of our participants today love questions. We're going to be talking with each other, even asking each other some questions. So we would appreciate you entering your questions into the GoToWebinar control panel, right there in the questions tab. And we'll try to get those along as we're having our conversation, as they're topical. And if there are any that we don't get to, we'll be sure to follow up after the webinar and see what we can do to help you out. So let's move on to our topic of the day. Protecting your data in Kubernetes. It's my distinct pleasure to introduce the panel to you. Tim Riley, who's CEO with Zetaset, Charles Kalaji, who's an analyst with Accelerated Strategies, and myself, of course, with Accelerated Strategies. Tim, why don't you start out by introducing yourself? Just let folks know about a little of your background, who you are. And of course, we'd love to hear a little bit about Zetaset.
Great, thanks, Mitch. Thanks for hosting. Name's Tim Riley. I'm CEO over at Zetaset. We are based in the Bay Area. We provide encryption and data protection. Been around for a few years and really have seen the expansion of Kubernetes and containers and how there's exposure within that new environment with data. Have quite a robust amount of legacy infrastructure type of products, but I think it's important to say we realize the future, like everyone else, that Kubernetes is the future of DevOps, digital transformation, all those lovely buzzwords, but it is important for that bottom line, to build that bottom line. And I think everyone sees that going into production is the way to go for Kubernetes. And we're very excited to be a part of it and help to protect data in those environments.
Very good, excellent. And thank you again for sponsoring our webinar today. Next, I'd love to introduce Charles Kalaji. Charles is someone I've known for a while. I used to brief him when I was with a product company. I think it was probably about 15 years ago or so, when he was an analyst with IDC and IDG or IDC. Which one did I get that right?
IDC. IDC was the analyst firm. IDG is the publishing house.
There you go. Thank you for keeping it straight. Well, please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about some of the work you've done as well as what you're working on now.
Well, thank you, Mitch. Yeah, so as you mentioned, I've been an analyst for a long time, and before that was with National Security Agency, so I'd like to say I speak encryption. So this research was very interesting to me because I do like to look at activities that involve, data protection and information protection, and we are moving there with the Kubernetes and the containers. So, we kind of wanted to look at where this the product or development has been going. It was people move to the cloud and do more mobile, and in this COVID time of work from home, a lot of activity. So what is going on? How are people protecting? So we went out and did a survey and saw where we're going with this, and that just builds on everything that we've been doing for I've been doing for 30 years as a market analyst and observer of the security space.
Excellent, great, and we'll get to what Charles was referring to in just a moment. Just to introduce myself, in addition to leading Accelerated Strategies Group, an analyst firm focused on data security, cybersecurity, client, cloud native, and DevOps, digital transformation. So we work with a lot of companies in this space, as Charles is mentioning. And I also have been a CIO as well as a product developer, so I've kind of lived on both sides of this and moved to the cloud and all of those good things. But enough, we're not here to talk about me. I really love to get to our topic. Charles was referring to Accelerated Strategies Group has been doing some work in data security, particularly around Kubernetes and containerized applications, containerized data. We have a report that should be being issued pretty quick, not too far away here in a matter of a few weeks or so. While we don't have the report available today, we may be able to refer to a few highlights from that research. While the webinar isn't just about the report, there's certainly some interesting facts and info that I think Charles will be able to share with us. So let's get on to our topic. The way we've designed this webinar is around a series of questions, kind of broad questions, so that we can tee that up and ask each other a little bit about those things. I think the first place to start is data properly protected within containers? We're always thinking, at least in my world, I always think about containers as a software thing, right? Putting elements of software inside containers, deploying those, spinning them up and down, et cetera, using Kubernetes as a management system for that. You don't often hear people talking about the data inside containers and things like databases and things like that. I know this is an area that you did some looking into, Charles. We'll talk a little bit about sort of what you've learned so far and some of the research you've done around data being properly protected.
Yeah, thank you, Mitch. Yeah, the report will be published soon, but the survey is completed and done some of the analysis of it. So, in the question of is data properly protected in containers, it really is a mixed, we got some mixed signals in the research right now. Whereas, it was interesting that, about half of the respondents said that, they feel that they've been effectively or close to effectively in protecting their data in containers, although the other half said they weren't. So you have to kind of look at some deeper data to get a better feel for, which of the half may be more appropriate or the directions because of that. So it kind of, if you just say, we had a question about encryption. So half of them said they feel it's effective, and half of them say, that there's a lot of work to go. So if you go, another layer and start looking at vulnerabilities. So we asked them, what are the vulnerabilities? What is the attack surface of in Kubernetes environments? The response is very different in that we asked the question, what is the most important or most critical attack surface for Kubernetes environments, and we had 5 options about is the container vulnerabilities or the core platform, or is it too complex, access control. So all those things to put down to try to get a feel for what is most critical to them. And 42% said all of them, all of the above. So that kind of leads me to feel that, yeah, for some of the encryption things, people feel half decent, but when they think about protecting their data overall, there's a lot more problems there, and there's a lot more work that needs to be done because there's so many different attack surfaces. They have to protect all of those attack surfaces and not just one.
So it's really not one area that folks were concerned about. It's really sort of kind of the gamut of things, it sounds like, from some of your research.
Oh yeah, it's a whole issue of again, is it vulnerabilities within the system? Is it vulnerabilities within Kubernetes? Is it the access control? Is it the processes and procedures kind of throw into that too? And all of that kind of tells us that there's a lot of work that needs to be done to protect the data that is in containers. And we're going to have to start. It's like everything else we do in security. You try to use what you have to make things work because you are deploying these. But in the long run, you need to be looking at some other solutions that are more tailored and more focused on the specific area that you're trying to deal with.
Charles brings up a lot of good points. I if I can jump in, you had me thinking of all the different areas. If we go back and look, let's just take a second back and go look at the legacy side of the house. And I think the security and the conventional wisdom will always tell you, yeah, I think I like to call it the three legs of the stool. There's the obvious one, which is access control. Then the second most is audit monitoring / a lot of people like to call it runtime analysis remediation. I think that's all a bundle together. And the third one is data protection. You have a couple different ways to do it, but the underlying, I'd say most accepted strategy is encryption for that data protection. So go back and look which ones have been adopted just with legacy. And for the most part, it's the first two. Data protection with encryption is the one that usually is the laggard. When do you have to put it in? Some people say after the fact. Some people say once there's a breach, you do it. Once you've been slapped, regulatory. So all these different variables come in of when you want to put encryption in place, and just data protection, I'm going to use that as a bigger term. That is now, I think, it's exaggerated, exasperated, whatever you want to say, the amount of time that people have to invest in security in these new Kubernetes environments. So everyone immediately took existing infrastructure within the database with whatever Kubernetes environment the container might be in and said, okay, let's just use that same playbook. Let's use the access controls that come with it and the monitoring. And I think a great example of that is just take a look at all the startups just in the last, I don't even think you can go that far back, 2 or 3 years that have sprouted out amongst all the securing Kubernetes and containers. It's been, I think everyone sees, the market has proven that there is an issue, there is a hole there. And yet again, even in this new world, everyone's saying, well, data protection, it still needs to be taken care of, but it's not at the top of the list. And my concern and our concern at Zetaset is we have a wealth of security experts. Some of these folks have been there 20 plus years. I've been in security for a good 10 plus, and everything I see tells me data protection is always behind the curve. And what we like to say at Zetaset is, why don't you make it part of your philosophy to start out with? When you're planning to push out DevOps to DevSecOps, make this part of it. And yes, you'll get a lot of people they agree but don't want to do it. I guess there's a balance between what do containers give us? What does Kubernetes give us? They give us efficiency, speed, and time to value, and be honest, it's the bottom line. That's really what it comes down to. So I like to call it the Goldilocks principle, which is a commonly used term. How do you balance efficiencies and optimization with securing? If you have a dune buggy, I guess it's very flexible, it moves everywhere, can do whatever. That's one end of security, or not much to it. The other end is a tank. Is that fast? Is that not? Where is the Goldilocks within that? And I think now that the database is in a container, that question is being asked again. And how it gets solved, I think it's almost a little too soon to say, okay, encryption isn't important. I don't think data protection within the container environment has truly been exposed, has truly explored its full requirement. As deployments get bigger, CNCF, what over the last 2 years has seen from 1,000 to 4,000 containers in deployment to 5,000 plus. Now we're getting to a new world where there's a temptation, and the data is now the most valuable commodity on the planet. It used to be gold for 4,000 years. Now it's data. So we got to protect it. That's how I kind of see the protection requirements, regardless of what type of database it is. I'm excited for the future for security and for us. I think there's going to be a growing need for it, for sure.
No, it's interesting. You talk about data being, the gold, the current gold, if you will, or more valuable than gold. As we move to the cloud, one of the topics is always around proliferation of data. And I think mostly we meant proliferation of databases or data sets and things that are in redundant multiple places across different clouds, edges, et cetera. Now you add the software architecture layer of it, and containers and containerized data, containerized databases. It's not just where it's located in the cloud, it's within and across cloud native applications. So it's not just an attack surface, it's a data management, data security, and then talk about attack surface on top of that. Where is all this and how is it being protected? Am I being too paranoid about it? But it seems to me it's elevated it beyond the DBA's problem, if you will. Now it's a system architect, a software architect, and a network engineer, a security engineer's problem.
You get me so excited to talk about this stuff. I like to say, if you're going to manage the data, you got to protect it. And for us, we view it as, I'm sure no different than any other security company. We're going to follow the data and protect it wherever it goes. And yes, to your point, Mitch, whether it's now at the edge device, it's on-prem, or it's in the cloud, multi-cloud, hybrid, all the buzzwords or all the potential scenarios of architecture, you have to be able to protect that data. Yeah, you're going to see that Kubernetes is going to orchestrate thousands of containers and pods. The level of exposure of just one container being compromised, yeah, think about that, exponential times 10,000. So how do you protect in such a sophisticated and constantly flexible and moving? I mean, think about that. How many times within an hour do you spin up one container? How many times? What's the average? I think the average life of containers was something like only 2 weeks. So that's, it's ambiguous as far as where it might be. And I think, how do you address security, not just data protection, but all security in such a fluid environment?
Yeah, I think you hit a point there, Tim. One, we've been saying for years that data is the new gold, or value. A company's value is in their data, not in their infrastructure in most cases, or property, so to speak. So that's the first thing. I think you're kind of hitting, though, one of the reasons in our survey why a good number of people said that they feel confident is that they're only doing limited. Those people, I suspect, are more limited deployments, so they have a good handle on it. But for the 50% that aren't confident are probably the ones with the 1,000 containers, and understand that as they continue, the complexity just continues to grow and grow, and you lose kind of that full confidence that you're protecting all your data at all times.
And I think with the remote environment, we're probably going to live in a new way for the foreseeable future. With that, and add I'll give you an example with healthcare. We have one customer that they collect data from a multitude of different insurance and healthcare providers. A lot of those folks are now working from home. The amount of times that they may be accessing an application that's in a container, it continues throughout the day, throughout every day. And I want you to imagine how many people in an IT or a developer that involves, and how many, if someone has a telehealth appointment, how many of those do you have in a day? You could have 700. They all go back to one main database. Well, think about a breach and some theft and how easy that is. What if you have one employer development that gets into one container that then is able to get in and attack the data because it's shared? And I think that is the bigger issue that we will see, the attack vectors that you guys talk about. Imagine 10,000 developers trying to touch a container and the shared data in one repository. How do you protect that? The 3 legs of the stool again come in there. You have to have access controls, but they can be you can have those stolen some way, shape, or form, especially with edge devices and the home. Will you audit and monitor that? Absolutely. But can you get through that? Can you get around it? Sure. So what's left? Once they get inside everything, you've got to have something to protect the actual data. I'll give you the analogy I like to use, which is I think it's from my Game of Thrones fandom. But you have the castle. What does the castle have? The castle has a moat. It has a drawbridge. It has walls. It has towers. It has the guys with arrows. It has everything. And I view those as access controls, runtime analysis, audit and logging. What happens if you get into the castle? What is left? The gold is right there. And at that point, you've got one final last line of defense, and that's encryption. So the 3 have to be pulled together. and we have plenty of Kubernetes partners that so we can put a nice bundle together. We'll have a couple of those listed on the likes of a Red Hat OpenShift, and we'll be doing the same with VMware Tanzu, because those are two of the larger distributions. Yes, we have the cloud providers as well. I think you have a great stat that talks to that a lot of people are leveraging those right now. But on the other side, one of the things from the survey I noticed was half, right, are just using raw, I call it raw Kubernetes, not a distribution. So if you just use that, what's your enterprise protection? How do you get around all that? I think there's a lot of security that still needs to be put in place. If you have that many people, I would almost call them still early adopters, doing their DIY, not leveraging the likes of these distributions, which Mitch said it, pretty much everybody has a Kubernetes distribution of some sort right now. Those are just the biggest players that we mentioned, but without security, how are you supposed to fully embrace that? How is your CIO supposed to feel comfortable that there won't be a data breach? And you can go up from there, whether that's the CEO, whether it's his job on the line, the board, the fines, whatever else it is. How do I get from utilizing this tool to leveraging all the value it gives me to protecting it without impeding progress? And if you're doing DIY, you definitely need to rely on somebody's security. You get a little bit from these enterprise distributions. So, and even these enterprise distributions out there, it's not to harp on these two, but whether it's Red Hat's OpenShift or VMware Tanzu, they embrace a lot of partners because they realize, hey, we're going to deal with the orchestration and the enterprise and deal with hybrid, but we're going to leave the true security up to the experts. And it's no different than any legacy database. They do the same thing. So how do we protect? I love, nice transition there, Mitch. This data in the production environments. There's only one way to do that. You have to have all three legs of the stool. My concern out there is you will find within the next 2 years, I believe, the deployments will get larger, and so will the temptations to hack and data breach and theft. I don't see that going away. I think whether it's a bad actor, a rogue nation, or someone just looking to do any kind of ransomware, the temptation just grows, and there's going to be somebody that's right there playing cat and mouse. I know some great other ones, whether that's like a Palo Alto Twistlock, Aqua Security, or a StackRox. They all are constantly running, trying to stay ahead. It's a cat and mouse game, and they're great partners. And we realize, hey guys, at some point someone might get around your software, so why don't we cover your on the back end? So in all those instances, production data is going to be the seminal to any kind of value you get. I'll give you one other example. Who did I talk to about this? If you have a customer service, and every time someone calls in, you spin up the app in the container, it accesses their data. Okay, imagine how many calls a call center might get in a day. How many times can that one container be breached and then get access to all the data of all the customers? Because behind the scenes, there's only so many security checkpoints within there. And again, encryption is probably your last line of defense in that. So yes, I see organizations deploying containers and leveraging data within those containers, but you can see the threats are just growing, and the use cases where you can leverage containers in Kubernetes environments is, I think it's infant. It is. I look upon, whether you look at Fed, well, we can get into that in a minute, healthcare, which is an easy one, financial, and even retail. Those in telco I'm sorry to just jump on all of them, but all of them really are, what we've seen with prospects or customers or dealing with our partners like Red Hat and VMware, they're all saying the same thing. There is a concern that we put all this production data in there, we're maximizing the benefits of this, but we're concerned about the data itself. And from what I've seen, I'll give you one telco. They really have a 5G emphasis with edge and dealing with all the AI and the analytics around everything, but they're pausing because they're missing that protection of live data. And this is ultimately the benefits, and everything we're going to get from this new world order are going to rely on balancing protection with the efficiencies you gain. So
I think Tim, is sort of the reality is when you get into production, right? It's one thing to talk about containers and security and protection of data. The rubber meets the road is when you have that data in production. I know, Charles, this was part of your research too, is looking at, are people really putting a great deal of production data in containers yet? Are we early in that adoption? Are we well down the road? What kind of a picture did you get from your research?
Yeah, I think Tim hit some of this already, and his customers are proving it out. But we did ask the question, what are your deployments? Are you just kicking the tires, so to speak? Doing it one-offs, or do you have a lot of your applications in production? And 39% of our respondents said that they are running multiple applications in production. And so, this is real. The interesting thing, being, as you know, Mitch, an analyst, you kind of look at things and get to get an idea of what things are happening. And, Kubernetes was relatively new for me. I'm kind of old school in some of these technologies, so I have to keep up all the time. And seeing that 39% of the people are using multiple applications, and then another 15 are moving that direction in the survey. This is happening, and it's happening. I think the deployments are probably occurring faster and faster as more people have to use the cloud, and you're not be able to rely on your data center at the office because people aren't at the office, they are at home. So you're using cloud, you're going to use these applications, you're going to have to roll them out, and you're going to put production data in them, and forward all speed ahead, I guess we could say. And that is where we're going. Interestingly, you kind of Tim talked about the different types of deployments, and so it is a mixed bag. A third of the people are using the native open source, a third are using cloud, and a third are using the Red Hats and the VMwares of the world. So there's still a lot of work on trying to figure out, I guess, which is most appropriate. But whatever flavor they're using, they are, this is being used in production, and it's being used in production a lot. At least that's what the survey is saying.
Yeah, can I add to that? If you look at the legacy world that's now been developing over, it's migrating to cloud. Whether you guys have the same opinion or not, I don't believe everything will ever go completely to the cloud. I think some people, depends on who you are, you will always want to grasp the data and control it on premise. Physically, whether it's physical machine or virtual, you want to touch it. That's not to say you won't put maybe over half your data up in the cloud. So I don't think we're going to get away from on-prem data centers anytime soon. I think you'll see hybrid for a long time. I think that is the future, is hybrid, and that hybrid may fork with some multi-cloud in there. Multi-cloud, I believe, from what I just spoke with one partner last week, said it's there. I think there's a lot of buzz, and we're starting to see it take off, but hybrid is where all the efficiencies are being gained. And Kubernetes is optimal for that, because you're going to be able to orchestrate wherever that container goes, whether it's touching data that's in AWS or it's in-prem or on-prem, wherever. Could even be the edge. Though you need to be able to leverage that. And look at that. We got along those lines. Here's a great example when you go back and look at VMs. So let's talk, how long has VMware been around? 20+ years. And specific to encryption, they came out with VM encrypt and vSAN encryption, I think in 6.5, I think it was, or something like that, only about 2.5 years ago. It's a 20-year-old company, and they finally got around to doing that. How much production was in VMs, and when did that start? Well, I would love to know that stat, but I'm just going to go on one assumption. How quickly now do you think containers is getting into production? That path and that timeline, I think, has been crunched 5x, and it's just suddenly we're going to do it now. And to that end, why would you wait if VMware took 18 years to get encryption? I think containers is going to take less than 3. And I think we're almost on the verge of seeing that based on what this survey has said and what we're seeing in the field.
Yeah, the survey is saying that people are, looking at their data security and their encryption and trying to find some component, because as you mentioned, yeah, they're going to have the data in their data centers, but cloud allows you, and hybrids allows you to move some of that, even if it's temporarily, and that temporary move needs to be secured.
Yeah, and go ahead, Mitch.
No, I was just going to say, it's interesting. You look at the Red Hats, VMwares, et cetera, the software architecture has become the application and vice versa. So we really don't have as bright a line, I think, as we had at one point, where now we do have to worry about security all the way up the software stack. It isn't divided to the infrastructure group, the application group, the data, and the security group. It's all interchanged. I mean, yes, it's in an architectural way, but whether even if it's running on-prem and it's a legacy environment, but being shared to a cloud-native application or enhanced API access, whatever it might be, that data is evolving in and out of that private data center as well as in and out of the cloud. So it's a more complex environment, not a simpler environment, which means, we have to have security involved in the architecture of the applications, not just the infrastructure.
And to that end, what kind of management can you have in a hybrid environment? And when it comes to Kubernetes, how are you supposed to be able to integrate with AWS or Azure and at the same time still have your legacy stack over here? And then, like you said, Mitch, up and down the stack depends on what app there is, that the complexity of that. And I think that's why everyone touts Kubernetes as the future. And I completely agree with that. It's really the only way to handle that, because containers will move everywhere. And they don't care what the environment is, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud. So unifying some level of encryption and data protection in those environments, I think that's the next evolution. If you look at the ubiquity of environments, that they don't matter anymore, because containers, they don't care where they are. It's the apps, it's who's pulling from the data. It doesn't matter where the data resides. You're going to need some unifying platform to be able to control that. And that goes for access controls or monitoring as well. And I think you're starting to see some of those unified platforms sprout up. We feel that's where the future is going for encryption as well. You have to unify it, because you can't just have the encryption for on-premise, then have to decrypt it, re-encrypt it, put it into AWS. If you want to move that data, that container, you got to decrypt it and recrypt it wherever you go. That's a tedious process that I think will inhibit a lot adoption of encryption. I think that's really the other.
I was just going to jump in, Tim. There's a really good question. I think you're going down this path, which Krunal asked about. What are your thoughts about continuous security? Can we achieve it in the cloud native environment? You think about not just cloud native, but across all these environments, methods of how you achieve continuous improvement. Any thoughts on that, or by you or Charles?
I have some. You want to go first, Charles? I've been talking a lot.
Yeah, the issue is, I think, continuous improvement, continuous security is something that we're always striving for. But I think that the problem becomes it is hard to move across different activities and different environments, and to combine all of those together. I think as we do some more service providers, they're the ones that are going to try to build that environment together so that it can be continuous. The cloud providers are one area that they're going to build, I would hope, and if the demand is there, right? So it's going to be up to the customers to demand that their cloud providers provide them with a lot stronger security. So that said, yeah, I think we can reach it if there's enough demand for it, and if the industry, the great thing about security industry is that it does work together. You do have, such as Tim's companies, working with the providers, the Red Hats and VMwares, to kind of build some of this stuff in to help create that continuous activity. So I would say we're probably, we're not there, and if we go into some of the survey activities some more, when the report comes out, you kind of see that there's gaps still. But can we reach there? Yeah, but it's going to be it's a demand issue as much as it is a vendor issue.
Tim, too, I think, thinking about continuous security, which is visibility into all security across all of your data applications and infrastructure, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud, hybrid, et cetera. It seems to me that's one of the reasons, when I saw like VMware coming out with its own Kubernetes stack, and I like to say, A to V, everybody has a Kubernetes product offering with AWS or maybe there's a C, but certainly VMware. But that's part of it is trying to find ways to simplify that security monitoring and visibility. Now we're talking about into the container level. I mean, is that something you see as you're either talking with your partners or your customers? They're grappling with that, and maybe that's why they're gravitating towards more of a Red Hat or a VMware in some cases, if they're very centric in those environments already.
Yeah, to jump off the question that you mentioned, cloud native encryption. I think if you had 100% of your data in AWS and all of your applications there, the costs that you'd be incurring are staggering. That's why I think some people are always striving to find a balance from on-prem and cloud. Certain things, it's price prohibitive. It really is to go and to stay in the cloud. Yeah, to a certain extent, your access controls, your monitoring, AWS has a wealth of different tools. That's fine. Well, is the world a homogeneous infrastructure for every enterprise? Absolutely not. Not only would you have on-prem, but you'd have different cloud providers. So I think that's why, to your point, Mitch, the hybrid world is what I like to call that. I think both IBM Red Hat and VMware Dell, they've both seen the writing on the wall and said, okay, let's see if we can span both. Those type of vendor, if you want to put HPE in there with Esmeralda, which they came out with, you have all these box vendors with massive footprints in the data center, hundreds and hundreds of millions of servers over the air out there. And they realize that the world is going to cloud. So there is going to be a migration, like I said, of some percentage of that, but there still will always be some footprint there. How do they marry the two and stay relevant in those? And all three of them, for them, have come out with some kind of, like you're saying, a unifying platform that does it. We are in the midst of doing integrations with those, where we can be a security tab within their management platforms, because you're absolutely right. You need to have visibility. Visibility and security, again, could be on access control monitoring. You could have the runtime. For us, I want you to think about this. It's one thing to encrypt and decrypt. It's another thing to also know who is decrypting. Who is that? Is Mitch on at 2 a.m. in the morning? How often is Mitch on at 2 a.m. in the morning? Why did Mitch just decrypt 2 petabytes of data and take it out of there? So having a unified view of that, that's where we view it is. We have to have hybrid encryption, I suppose, is a better way of putting it. But I see all vendors going that way.
Speaking of encryption, this is something else that I wanted to have us look at. And you think of data security, you automatically think of encryption. Okay, if I encrypt things, everything's fine. If I maybe put some access control around that or some logging or whatever. But truly in a containerized world, let me pose that as an open question. Is traditional data encryption adequate? Is that enough to protect containerized data? I can imagine you have some thoughts about this one, Tim.
I definitely do. I think how can you look at how much the world has embraced Kubernetes containers, which is making life so much more flexible and efficient for the enterprise, and just not have encryption follow that same path? Would you rather have a top-down, meaning what Kubernetes containers are doing and that flexibility to touch data, or would you just have it be a bottoms-up right now, which is, I would call it's turning into a dinosaur? And the opportunity we have is to educate and say, guys, I know you didn't completely adopt encryption in the legacy environment, but you have an opportunity now with the fluidity of Kubernetes and touching so many things. Why not make encryption and its application just as flexible? And it's an easy sell when you go that way. So let's take one step and look a little closer. What are really your options when it comes to encryption? You have your little cake stack where you have at the base, you have full disk, and next one up, you have file and folder. Then you might have transparent. You may have application security. As you go up that stack, you get more and more performance hit. So again, it's more of that tank to dune buggy type of analogy was what is good enough encryption versus without impacting the performance and the business operations. And I think we've looked at ourselves and we looked at everything, and it's more of just a philosophy. Where is the Goldilocks? Back to that principle. And I think we found it. If you look at what currently is something which we feel is too much is file and folder. You maybe heard of table and cell. How many times do you need that much granularity of encryption? It's very few. Is it enough to encrypt large partitions or volumes? Go a little bit bigger. Is it okay to encrypt one large vSAN or a cloud native storage? Or is it just okay to have a self-encrypting drive? As you can see, it goes more general, and at some point you're too general. You're trying to protect the universe with one key. On the other end, you're trying to protect every atom. So where is that fine level of balance? And we feel that what needs to happen happens at the partition or volume level, because it's a perfect fit. Where if you know your Kubernetes, when that worker node has a developer hits an app, the app has a container. The container says, all right, let me touch volumes. Persistent volumes are created. And it's at that point, what do you want in that persistent volume? How about we just encrypt the persistent volume and call it a day? Or do you do every single little file and folder in there? And you kind of kill the whole point of containers. It's supposed to be speed. So balance that. How do you embrace speed with protection? And another thing a lot of people don't realize is once you're done with data, that persistent volume that was created for that container and the app to touch it, it doesn't go away. It's still there. So you've used it and it's still floating out there. So how do you protect that? You got to encrypt it and you have to keep it on the side. Finally, I mean, you can encrypt it, throw away the key, and then yeah, it's gone forever. But a lot of folks just let them float there. And they go, well, okay, I'll just use access controls and runtime analysis, but it's still floating there exposed. And we feel that that's, again, back to the third leg of the stool. That is the way you have to do it. The current legacy, they don't encrypt the persistent volumes. They don't have that same functionality. And so we need to evolve with the times. Hopefully that kind of set it up.
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, oftentimes, our tendency is to use what we have at hand or what we know, right? Mm-hmm. And you think about, encrypting things on disk was really one of the main purposes is so when it leaves, if it ever leaves your control, somebody can't do something with it, right? But once it's read off the disk, it's not encrypted. So we move it into the database or into the volume. Right. Now we're talking about what in the container. So I see it as kind of this evolution of where is this happening. Mm-hmm. And yes, encryption will be always part of the picture, but it's not just encrypting the data. I'm curious, Charles, I know you looked at, were people just relying on traditional encryption as their strategy, or is that starting to be overtaken by other things? What did you find in your research?
Yeah, so that's what I alluded to in the first question about the data protection in general. So we asked the question about, what type of encryption they're using and are they using encryption? And, again, 47% said they're doing traditional or they're using traditional encryption tools. But I think it's, an issue of, as you mentioned, they're using what's available to them right now and not really going deep into doing a full threat assessment and determination about what the future brings. As Tim mentioned, how long is this data going to be around? Where is it going to be accessed? So they're kind of looking at that, and some, even about 15% said they're using just network encryption to use, for transmissions, I guess, to secure it. But that people are using it. But again, that's where I went back and said, and they kind of say, yeah, it's okay, but I don't think if we're looking at a huge, 1,000 applications with all this data, that the traditional tools are going to work. That right. right now the people are just, as they're using a small deployment or not using a lot of information, they're controlling things a little better, that they're able to just use, okay, we're just going to use some database encryption for right now, and or as you say, disk encryption, whatever they're used to, whatever their processes tell them to use. I think what's going to happen, and interestingly, to kind of take this to a different direction, if we just think of data encryption tools and technology, yeah, people say they're using it, but the survey also says that there's a lot of policies and procedures that need to change. So I think what's happening is, yeah, we're used to disk encryption, we're used to some database encryption, so we're using those tools where we can, but they're also kind of saying that, as our policies and procedures and activities change, this is not going to hold up, I think, in the future. So again, it's a mixed bag where you just look at the data and say, oh, they're using encryption, and some feel that it's effective, and half feel it's effective, half don't. But again, you start digging down into the policies and procedures and activities, and there's a lot more concern about the effectiveness of their security and their data encryption than the top line element of the survey says.
I have to jump on that because that's important. I think it's just the Container Journal had an article today about how working from home and the amount of users and the amount of containers, it takes one to be compromised, okay? And that one container might be touching the same data that, say, another 1,000 containers is also touching. And right now, the security aspect, we can back up to what Charles is saying about overall protection. But with regards to data protection, all of these different variants of distributions, they have their cloud native storage types, whether it's vSphere volume or a Ceph or AWS with EBS, Azure with file disk. All of them have the same thing, that there's one key. Once you get into that larger storage, you're in. Whereas imagine that's the fortress. It's one key, you get in, you see everything. Whereas maybe you have 6 containers and they're able to only access one piece of the data within it. So if you have this growing exposure because you have more people at home and more containers, to what you're saying, Charles, I think it's still at the beginning. My fear is we're accelerating a lot faster because of the pandemic and this new environment we're in. And you're going to see more vulnerabilities if you're just relying on legacy type of data protection. I really do. I think 2021, you're going to see some bigger breaches, and we're going to find out quietly that a lot of them may have come from Kubernetes environments. And
wouldn't be the first time security had to catch up with the pace of the business and technology moving in applications, for sure. Sorry, Charles, I cut you off.
Well, I was going to say, I think the optimism that I saw in the survey is because we don't have that big breach yet. And as soon as that happens, that you can directly relate to Kubernetes environments, then you're going to start saying, people say, ooh, man, this, yeah, we got to figure something else out. I have to say that, this was a survey about the data protection and many other aspects. So, we didn't just drill down into encryption to deal with those people, because I would have liked to get a little more understanding in their key management, but I don't think we were at a point with the research to get into that level of detail. So maybe that's something we'll be looking at in the future, because as you mentioned, Tim, key management is the important aspect, right? Do you have a key for every user, or are you using a group key that, as you say, one gets compromised, all of the data is compromised?
Session keys, all kinds of things.
Exactly.
We have about 10 minutes left. I want to turn our attention to one last question. We think about DevSecOps with DevOps and containers, cloud native security. What's your sense, Tim, as you talk with organizations about infosec teams being more engaged in that software architecture discussion, the containerized data security, things like that we brought up earlier?
I have this view that it's still halvesies. I think you're seeing DevOps pushing this forward, having unfortunately to be in charge of security on it, and that's just not their core competency. And on the other side, you have the infosec folks that may be finding out after a little bit that, okay, guys, go out. We have this deployment of Kubernetes. It's on you to figure out how to secure it. And they may not know everything about DevOps. So you have this, I think there's a gap of who knows, who understands the environment and who knows how to protect in that environment. Who do we see as we knock on doors? It's a split. I've seen the DevOps folks coming to us. I've seen the IT folks, just your normal DBA saying, hey, I got tasked with putting some infrastructure in place. And then, yeah, then you have the information people overall looking at, okay, I think we've got a hole here. We just don't know enough about the system. So I've seen, I don't know if it's been identified yet. DevOps is such a fluid thing. People are still trying to figure out how to secure in it and who should be responsible for it.
Any interesting things in the data there, Charles?
Yeah, that was specifically one of the questions we wanted to look at, looking at how infosec teams are integrated into the Kubernetes developments and things. So interestingly, overall, about nearly half of the respondents said that their infosec team was either a part of the development, so they were involved, or even, I think it was like maybe 20% of that, or were just infosec teams were in charge of security in this environment. So, from my point of view, and having seen developments where security was not involved at all, or if you look at where website development and other aspects where you had almost no security involvement until after the fact, this having 50% close to being involved during development and as things are rolling out, that's encouraging. However, there's the other shoe on that.
There's always a however.
There's always a however, and Tim again alluded to this in some ways where he talked about the skills gap, right? So we did ask that question about, are your security teams involved, and then what's the how do you see them being effective? And so again, half of the people are using the infosec teams, but they're of that 50% of them, so 25% of the whole environment, are saying that the security guys they don't have the skills to provide kind of expertise in the Kubernetes space. And I'd say, as an analyst in my own, I did do a lot of research on this, so I'm sure people in the security space are like, okay, I gotta understand what's going on here. So there is yeah, the good part is a lot of organizations are actively involved. The difficulty is that there's a skills gap, not just a security skills gap, but a Kubernetes and containerization and cloud skills gap of the security team. And we did ask that question about what needs to be done, and 60% of the people said we need more education for the persons. And I kind of mentioned we need better policies and procedures that deal directly with these issues. We can't use our existing, we're just going to use disencryption, or need to have policies and procedures and education. So that's kind of the next step. So encouraging that the security teams are involved, but we're going to have to educate them and give them policies and give them procedures to make them much more effective, I guess we could say. And so glass half full, I guess we could say.
Yeah, it's a necessary investment. You can't get around it. If you're going to embrace Kubernetes, you have to also look at the flexibility in the architecture that involves security along with that. And the technology and the type of products and the implementation of security needs to change and keep pace. And right now, you're absolutely right, Charles. I don't think enough people understand, one, what Kubernetes is, two, how to secure it, and the two don't understand each other when it comes to, okay, I got to do this or I lose my job and there's data breach problems. This guy is saying, I just got to get this app out so I can get this customer happy and charge more for it. How do you marry those two? And it's investment, it's education, like you're saying, and it's just awareness. And I think between you guys and us and our various roles in this world of security, it's important to get that message out, because I do believe you will see some breaches in the next year, in 2021, based on how many containers are touching things and people are remote. Whether you hear about the breach is another thing. You hope you do, but I can see it coming.
Yeah, but I am encouraged in the research that, the security and the developers are talking at this point.
Absolutely.
So they are trying to find the Goldilocks point between getting it out to the customers and securing it. So that's encouraging, because we haven't seen that in the past very often. It's generally been, deployment first, or, even in times when security had a lot more weight, they could just shut things down. Shutdown's not an option, but making sure that the customer's data is protected is important too. So it's encouraged. I'm encouraged on this, and I think the people you're probably talking to are trying to find solutions too, and that's why they're talking to you guys.
There is hope, and there is empirical evidence that there's hope out there, and folks are making investments. And let's just keep that coming, because the concerns are only going to get bigger.
Yep.
If I just add my 2 cents, one of the things I've said for a while now, somebody who has had a foot in both camps of software and security, is, there's having your discipline, your sort of specialty area. At some point, I think we've got to cross-pollinate and have security folks learn software architecture, not to be developers. Wouldn't suggest that at all. Let developers be developers. But the more it's sort of like being the general contractor or the inspector of a home. You kind of have to know all the trades that you're involved in, but you're not being the good cop, bad cop anymore. You're now being asked to participate in the design of this to help make sure when it's built correctly, combining your security discipline with some expanded knowledge. So maybe that skills gap is, I think a lot of what you were saying, Charles, was it's wanting to know more about Kubernetes and how it works and how you protect it, not just, what's the next encryption algorithm we're going to use for that. I'm minimizing it by saying it that way, but yeah, I think that's really the kind of education. So that's the good news too. People are asking for more training, more help, and I guess that's the first step, is recognizing you need help, right, or you have a problem. Well, this has been super.
So just my plug for the security person who's interested in being in security or aspect is that you get to touch many, many different technologies and not just be dealing with one. So when you're in security, you're going to be dealing with all of these things,
right.
So cloud and mobile and Kubernetes and PCs, or all of those things have a security component. And when you're in security, you get to play with all of them. So that's one of the things I enjoy about being in this field.
Tim, we're coming up on the close of our time. Before I get to the thank you, and by the way, this report that Charles is talking about will be out not too far down the road, a week or so you can find it there. I'd love for you to take a chance. I appreciate your discipline of not turning into a commercial about Zetaset, but tell us a little bit more about how Zetaset approaches this part of the market and your solutions, and what gives you that passion that you have about this space.
Yeah, I think we have some folks that have been in the security, encryption, key management. I know we didn't touch on that very much. They were some of the founding folks all the way back in 2000 when a SafeNet created their first key manager. They designed and architected it. So you have these, I have this group around me that educates me. I am not that smart, actually. They just verse me very, very well on what to say. And what they have seen is, yes, encryption can be an afterthought, but it's slowly growing in its adoption quicker. And at Zetaset, we say, yes, there's plenty of legacy out there that continues to need some level of infrastructure. Again, it's Goldilocks. So we provide products, whether they're at the software level, the full disk level, object for S3, archiving. So we have all those, and you can wrap around a lot of different features. And then now like we've just talked about, we go into more of the Kubernetes. Marrying the two with hybrid is where we see the vision, bringing it all together with one management platform and partnering with everybody else. That's where Zetaset sits, because it's going to be a universal crypto policy wherever data is. It needs to be protected and encrypted. And we feel we're in a great position to offer that as a comprehensive portfolio. One thing to add, software only. We don't need an appliance. It's nothing like you can run it on a good old-fashioned white box. Speed, speed, speed. That's what it's all about. If you can do performance and high performance compared to some of the other folks out there, we're about 2 to 3%. They may upwards of 25 to 60, depending on deployment. And I think what we just talked about with regards to the knowledge base, way we've designed it is that you don't have to be a cryptographic expert. You can just use ours. It's scalable because it's software only, and it's going to meet your needs. You're going to help get compliance. So when you wrap all that together, I think we've tried to make encryption easier without impacting your everyday operations, making it transparent and high performance. We really do see the larger infrastructure vendors admitting that we had some token level of encryption, we just didn't do it well enough. You guys seem to fit that need, and we have partnerships across the board with the larger ones, whether that's Dell, VMware, IBM, NetApp, HPE. They all have realized that this is something that they're missing if they want to continue to grow deployments with all the data that's being created. And the hybrids are the two big ones, whether that's Red Hat with their version of Kubernetes and OpenShift, or VMware Tanzu. They've seen it as the way to go. Hybrid, 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 and universal view of encryption. And we feel that is the future, and we feel we're well positioned for it. We're very excited about being the de facto encryption for data protection.
Excellent. Well, Tim, thank you so much. Tim, CEO with Zetaset, for sponsoring, more importantly, for contributing your knowledge, and both yours and accumulated from your team. Very well done. And Charles, thank you, of course, bringing your industry expertise, going back to the 3-letter TLA agencies we can't talk about, but also as an analyst and encryption expert. I also wanted to mention to our folks that we are sending an email to everyone with a recording from today's webinar, so check that out, share with your friends. Also want to let you know who our winners of our 4 gift cards are. First is Deborah W., James M., Luca M., and Victoria G. The folks at containerjournal.com will reach out to you and get those gift cards to you. So on behalf of Tim and Charles and myself, thank you so much. We appreciate you spending this hour with us. Your time super valuable. We're honored that you spent it with us. So have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.